welcome back, everyone. This is Charli Wall with my podcast, Courage, Dear Heart. And I have been doing this series for Mental Health Week around nature. And today I'm joined by the lovely Ian Watson. So welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Charli. Lovely to be here.
It's lovely that you agreed to talk to me. And we're matching too.
We didn't plan this, right?
We didn't plan it. So the way I start all of my podcast episodes. Oh gosh, I think I might have lost you.
You disappeared momentarily, but I think you're still there.
Yeah, hopefully I'm back. All right, sorry about that. My podcast is called Courage, Dear Heart, and I'd love to know what the word courage means for you.
Okay, when I think of courage, I mean, I do think of the association with heart, but I often remember the fact that when people do things spontaneously, like, save the life of someone or act, on instinct in a moment where they act without thinking, it often appears courageous. People often afterwards say, wow, that was really brave what you did. But the person themselves often doesn't feel like they were being courageous in the moment. So I find that quite interesting about courage, is that it's often when we're acting out of some, I would call it like a deeper impulse. And it's not from a place of habitual thinking, or it's not something that we have pre-planned or prepared. We're just doing something that arises, and often we're on the edge of not knowing what we're doing. So it can have that feeling of nerves around it, but it turns out to be something important or necessary or pivotal even. So that's my association with courage, going into the unknown. Yeah,
and that's extraordinary that you would use that and talk about that, because we're here to talk about this. Today's theme is natural wisdom. This is your topic for today, and I think that just speaks so beautifully to that. What do you see about natural wisdom?
Yeah, I like this topic. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but I've actually run a program with my friend Claire down in Devon called Natural Wisdom.
Oh my God, no, I didn't.
Which is a nice coincidence. And at Dartington in Devon, and we've run it for several years. And part of the intention behind that was to bring people into a deeper understanding of themselves, but also in the context of a beautiful natural environment where we can reference what's going on the inside and see how that's mirrored and reflected in what's going on in the natural world. And of course, there's lots and lots of parallels, because it turns out we're part of nature.
Who knew?
So I think one of the things that is, to me, is important about this is the fact that we've, in some way, in our own minds, I'm not saying individually we've done this, but collectively we've done this thing. We've separated ourselves from nature to some degree. And this is for a long time. Our cultural myth has been one around humans and nature are somewhat separate, and even heaven is somewhere else. Heaven and earth are separate. And these apparent divisions, I think, have been very important for us, not always in a good way, and have informed, for example, the way that our science treats the natural world as something to be, dominated, or, putting humans at the top of this notional hierarchy of species. All of these ideas have created a sense of separation, and that nature is something that we exploit and, we extract commodities from and so forth, which is a very different attitude towards nature than the one that's been held by indigenous traditional societies for thousands of years. And I've sensed that what's happening now and what needs to happen is a recollection of that deeper wisdom, which used to inform our relationship with nature. And I think it is happening. It's bubbling up in people all over the world, where we start to recognize that, first of all, we are part and parcel of nature. We're born, we come out of this earth, just like all other creatures. We're not coming from anywhere else. And that there is that truth that what we do to nature, we do to ourselves. And often we don't see that. And I think that there's many examples where we think we can do things to nature and get away with it. But nature has to me, nature has a way of teaching us. And this is part of the wisdom, I think, in nature. And it's interesting because the figures that have often been, when nature is personified as a goddess, it's usually a goddess. It's typically a feminine personification, which I think is interesting. So to me, there's something about natural wisdom is also feminine wisdom. It's the reclamation of the feminine wisdom, which has been, to a large extent, superseded in the Western world by a more masculine dominant attitude. And so we have figures like Gaia, for example, representing the earth herself, Sophia, Demeter, and so on. There's many goddess figures that embody the qualities and attributes of nature and nature wisdom. And I think to me, it's important to point that out because I think the feminine principle, and I'm not talking about male, female, I'm talking about it as a principle, which of course exists for both men and women. As a principle, it has to do with the earthy, the embodied, and the felt sense, the sentient aspect of our beingness. And there's also something about it that's dark and mysterious. It has to be uncovered and it has to be approached respectfully. So all the mythical tales speak about the necessity to approach with an attitude of open-heartedness and a willingness to be humble, so that, and it's even that word humble has its roots in hummus, not the chickpea dish, but hummus, the earth. To be humble means to get close enough to the earth, basically on your knees, so that you can actually listen to the earth herself and you can be informed. And so it completely turns on its head, this idea that we're in charge here, we know what we're up to, we're going to decide what to do with all this stuff on the earth. It's like, no, the earth is a sentient organism within itself, and we're part of that, and we can tune into it. And then it starts to reveal its secrets. If we approach it in that spirit, it turns out that we can learn from nature pretty much everything we need to know about health, about how to live in harmony with each other and also with the rest of the world. So I think there's so much that we can learn there that I would include under the heading of natural wisdom. If you want, I can go into some of the detail of that if you want, or you can ask me something else.
I'd love you to go into some of that detail. I've written all these questions, but it looks like it's just flowing anyway. But what I'd love you to just give the listeners, because obviously this is about mental health, and people don't often just arrive at the place that you've arrived at, with this knowledge and knowing. How did you get to here? Like, what's your back history of mental health, mental wellness?
Sure. Yeah. For me, as a kid growing up in the north of England, I grew up in a small town, but it was a town that was surrounded by nature, by moorland and forest. And as youngsters in those days, we just used to, myself and my friends would just go off all day, on the weekends and the holidays and all evening after school, and just play until we were so hungry that we'd come back to eat, that kind of business.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it was considered normal and safe to do that in those days. And so for me, that was my playground, first of all, as a young child. And then it became my place of kind of solace and refuge as I got into my teens and I started to suffer angst, and self-consciousness and everything that comes with being a teenager. It was still my go-to place, more often on my own. Then as I got a bit older, I would find myself just naturally drawn to go into the moorland and into the woods. And I was very at home, very comfortable there. It wasn't a scary place for me. It was actually a place that I found reassuring and settling. And I developed a fascination for trees and plants, at quite a young age, which I just gave myself the freedom to follow. So, and that eventually became not just my hobby, but my work. I started to learn herbal medicine, flower essences, and then homeopathy. It led me into a path of natural healing, which has been my work ever since. The nature of it has taken different forms, but that was really the origin of it for me.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. And I guess that took courage as well, did it?
Well, it had that element of, I would say, following a deeper impulse.
Yeah.
Because in some respects, it didn't really make sense, and it wasn't what most of my mates were doing.
Yeah, but also because you alluded earlier, like to that sort of fairly dominant masculine way of living.
Yeah, and I had a foot in that camp as well, because I had to, in order to kind of fit in and get along with my peers. I also went to watch football on the weekends, and when I got a bit older, go down the pub with my, that kind of thing. So I had in a sense a bit of a split life for a while, and so it was mostly a solitary interest and pursuit for me. The relationship that I started to develop with the natural world. And it was much later in my life that I started to meet and connect with other people who very much inhabited that world. But yeah, initially I did feel a little bit of an alien in that respect. So I suppose it took courage in the sense of following what felt right to me, even though it maybe made me look a bit crazy in the eyes of other people.
So just following that natural intuition, that natural wisdom within you, and trusting that at such an early age is quite rare, I think, even now.
Probably, yeah. And again, it didn't feel like anything unusual to me, because that's just what I knew to do. But when I hear other people's stories and experiences, I realize it's probably not that common. Yeah.
So can you go back to where you were about the natural wisdom exploration? Yeah.
One of the people that really inspired me early on in my study was Edward Barch, who would develop the Barch flower remedies. A lot of people will have heard of the rescue remedy, this beautiful set of essences that he developed over 60 years ago now. It was in the 1920s and 30s, I think, that he was developing them. And his story really inspired me, because he was a medical doctor, highly qualified and respected medical doctor. He had a Harley Street clinic, lucrative practice. And yet he was obviously a very sensitive, intuitive individual. And he felt disillusioned with the form of medicine that he trained in and that he was practicing. And he started to explore things like homeopathy, and he was kind of finding his way, but that wasn't quite it. And then at a certain point, he just threw it all up. He gave up his practice, closed everything down, and he allowed himself to be led by his own intuition without a plan. And when I read his story, the biography about him, I was like, this is, it really touched something in me, that someone with that kind of background and working in the field that he was working could give all that up. And then he just allowed himself to wander around the country lanes of Norfolk, where he lived, and also he went to Wales quite often. And he started to develop a sensitivity to flowers, such that when he found himself in a particular emotional state, he could sense which flowers would be helpful if he prepared them as an essence in order to help heal from that state. And this is how he developed his range. So he was literally tuning in and being informed by the flowers themselves. Okay. He wasn't going out there deciding, which one's good for what. They were telling him. They were showing him. Right?
That's amazing, isn't it?
Isn't it?
I didn't know that. I didn't know that backstory. I'm going to have to read that book.
Yeah, this blew my mind. And it just, I suppose it opened me to that whole possibility, which of course is not unknown to people outside of the Western mindset. For thousands of years, shamans and individual healers in different parts of the world have had that kind of relationship with nature, where they've been able to listen in and get the messages from nature that are actually helpful for humanity. And it kind of inverts the hierarchy of species a little bit, doesn't
it? Completely reverts it. It's such a sadness, to me, that we're not reversed the other way.
But the first thing that flags up for me is that there is an innate intelligence in all of nature.
Yeah. Including
And that in itself is a powerful and helpful thing to realize, that everything that we see in the natural world is but the visible expression of a divine conscious intelligence. And there isn't anything outside of that. And as such, everything in nature is sacred, including humans. No difference.
Can I just ask you to expand on that a little bit? Just that bit that you just said, for people who that may have just sort of got over their head. Divine intelligence, what do you mean? What do you mean? Could you just expand a little bit on that, just that bit? Because it was very powerful what you just said, and I want to hear just that bit.
To me, it's just acknowledging the simple fact that that nature itself is miraculous. There's a miracle at work, that all of these myriad forms, which are not only being created individually, each is unique. You know, I mean, even every snowflake is unique and different from every other snowflake, for goodness sake.
I know.
If that doesn't blow your mind, I mean, to me, it's just incredible. And yet, despite that, none of it is separate from any other part. There's the whole of nature, the totality of nature functions as a whole, and everything is interdependent on everything else. Everything is interdependent on everything else. We're only just starting to understand that now from a Western scientific point of view. People are starting to uncover things about, like, the secret life of trees, for example, has become
great book,
quite popular now, isn't it? And the recognition, not only do the trees communicate with each other, same species, yeah, and then they discover, oh, wait a minute, different tree species seem to communicate with each other. Oh, wait a minute, they communicate with the fungi too. And the fungi act as a kind of intermediary between the different tree species. Like, oh my God. And of course, it's on and on and on like this. And they're communicating in such a way that is beneficial to the interests of the whole at all times, so that nothing is favored and nothing is excluded. And that, to me, is a piece of natural wisdom that we could do well to learn and take to heart at these times, is that everything has its place. Everything plays a unique part, has a unique role to play, and that when we're in harmony with our own uniqueness, let's say our own individuality, then and only then can we participate fully in our relationship with everything else. So that, to me, is one of the lessons that nature kind of models to us, is that everything's needed, everything plays its part, and you can't just willy-nilly go and say, oh, we don't like this bit, we're gonna get rid of it. Let's kill this virus, bacteria, whatever we decide we don't like. That's not okay. That's problematic, because of the holistic nature, the way that nature functions as an intelligent ecosystem in totality. You cannot interfere or eliminate one part without creating repercussions for the whole. It's not possible. So I think this, to me, is a very important message for us from nature. And nature also teaches us about healing. What healing is. The word healing has its root in the word wholeness. So healing has an implication of coming back to wholeness. It's the recognition or a restoration of the wholeness that already is, that we may have lost sight of. It restores wholeness, if you like. It restores the awareness of wholeness, but actually there was never anything but wholeness. And nature loves diversity. So we get the idea, let's completely cut down all these trees and clear this piece of land and let's just grow one crop. There's a good idea. We'll grow lots of that one thing and make loads of money. Turns out nature doesn't think that's a good idea. Monoculture is is a plague on the planet, and it creates all kinds of problems. And it's very difficult for us to get that to work successfully. So we have to poison the earth with all kinds of herbicides, pesticides, fertilizer, to make something work that wasn't designed to work.
Mm, mm.
And of course, all of that gets washed into the river, into the ocean. Who suffers eventually? I mean, all the species, but we too included.
Mm.
So nature again teaches us that we have to be respectful of the diversity within nature. That there's leeway. We know we can, if you have a garden, you can encourage the plants and discourage the weeds up to a point.
But what if there's perfection in the weeds too?
Well, exactly. From another level of understanding, you come to see that actually what a weed is just a plant that we decide isn't useful to us or enjoyable,
Yes.
It's a judgment, isn't it, that we're making. And to a herbalist, those what we call weeds are often the treasures, things like dandelion and so on. So on somebody's lawn, it's a nuisance. To a herbalist, it's one of the most powerful and useful herbs that we have available. So a lot of it has to do with just a shift in our perspective and our relationship to the natural world. And then we can start to be informed by it. I think also nature teaches us things like patience, if we're willing to listen, because nature is cyclical and seasonal and rhythmical. Not everything doesn't happen all at once. Everything happens in its own season. And then there's a return to an earlier, there's a kind of cycling around and coming back to the start point, on and on and on without end. And to me, that's really helpful for us to reflect on, because that's true for us too, as we're part of nature. So we're also subject to seasons and cycles and the rhythms of nature. And we can't expect that, what we think should be happening is going to happen right now or tomorrow. We might have to wait until the season for it to happen. We might have to till the soil a little bit for a while, plant the seeds, water the seeds. There's a period where it doesn't look like anything's happening, right?
Yeah.
Teaches us to trust. It teaches us to trust that there are deeper forces at work. And that's really what I mean when I talk about the divine conscious intelligence behind life. There are deeper forces at work which we would do well to cultivate an appreciation of and an understanding of, and then we can align ourselves with them, and then they work favorably for us as well as for everything else.
Do you mind me asking you, how did you get an embodied sense that was true?
Well, mostly by getting out of alignment, noticing that hurts, and then paying enough attention to see, well, okay, what do I need to stop doing that's seemingly taking me away from that sense of being in the let's say in the flow of life, in alignment, in harmony with myself. And that's not a one-off learning. That to me is an ongoing, lifelong learning for all of us. But we get the feedback. That's another beautiful thing about nature as a living organism, is that there's feedback built into the whole system. So anything that becomes too much is counterbalanced over here. Anything that becomes deficient is counterbalanced over here. So there's this constant rebalancing that's built in. We don't have to do anything to make that happen. It's built into the intelligence of the design. Well, that's true for us too. So on a personal level, I've gotten sick at times during my life, and the fact of getting sick has alerted me to the fact that I was either overworking or stressing myself or suppressing something that my body needed to feel. There's a lot of different ways that we can throw ourselves out of the natural rhythm. I've explored most of them probably, as we all do. But the thing is, if you're willing to take the feedback, rather than just take a pill and make it go away, which again has become our default Western attitude, symptoms are pesky things that we think shouldn't be happening. Well, as someone who trained in holistic understanding of health, that doesn't make sense to me anymore. And it hasn't done for a long time. What I came to understand is that no, symptoms are feedback.
Yeah.
Just as feelings are feedback. Feelings are feedback about the state of our consciousness, what's going on in our mind at any moment. Well, bodily symptoms are also similarly giving us feedback about how we're living and acting in ways that are maybe not in harmony with the truth of who we are. In that moment, we might need to make some adjustments. And if we're willing to listen, we get shown what we need to do or stop doing.
You've just, as you were talking there so beautifully, and about the weeds and the perfection in that too, Leanne Brooke Tyler on Monday was talking about the gifts of mental illness as being gifts and the messages. And you just spoke to that. And I wondered, you know, you said there, you know, your feelings are a feedback. Do you see that mental health issues are a gift as well? And what would you say to someone who had never heard that my feelings are a feedback? What do you mean, Ian?
I know it is a radical idea at first, but I think if you allow yourself to just sit with it and consider it for a while, you can start to see the sense in it pretty quickly. And just very recently, I was having a conversation with someone who's struggled with migraines for a long period. And one of the questions that I asked this person was, well, when you have a migraine, what happens? And the immediate answer was, well, it just kind of stops me in my tracks. And as the conversation went along, I invited this person to consider that maybe stopping wasn't always a bad idea. Now, when I first suggested that, that sounded like a strange idea. But in between the conversations, the person reflected on it and she saw something about that. And she realized, like, oh my God, that's true. The migraine comes when I need to stop and I push myself to keep going.
Yeah.
Now, that's not necessarily true for everybody that has migraines. It probably isn't. But for that individual, she recognized something that was really valuable. And then she could see from that is, if I catch that impulse at the point where I'm about to start pushing myself and my head's about to start pounding, it doesn't have to go into a full-blown migraine. I can notice where it's headed and I can give myself the rest that I need in that moment and cancel whatever I thought was super important, because it turns out my body needs something else right now. So that's the person who's learning from the feedback and then he's able to come back into alignment. We can all do that. And I think any symptom has got information in it if we're prepared to be, again, humble enough to be. It's like, you got to play stupid, you know. It's like, I don't know. We've got to let go of what we think it means, because we've been indoctrinated with the idea that when we're in pain or we're suffering, something's gone wrong, something's happening that shouldn't be happening, and we need to get rid of it. Well, if we can let go of that idea and say, well, no, there's an intelligence at work, then we're open to learning.
Yeah. Oh gosh, Ian, all my questions have gone out the window.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's all good.
I ruined your question.
No, you didn't, really, because this is all perfect. It's meant to be, as it's like you say, we think we're in charge. We get in the way of our natural wisdom and well-being and plaster on things, plaster on the earth, plaster on ourselves, mental health, physical health. My questions are just, I've written questions every day, right? But every day what I actually do is just let it flow.
That's the way of nature, right? We have our ideas and then nature shows us how close they were to what actually is ready to happen.
Yes, and I trust that. But I would like to know what's been the impact of this embodied knowing on your life?
Well, I haven't seen a doctor for 43 years.
That's pretty good.
That would be a very practical to me.
I'm 49, so that's most of my life.
Yeah, to my mind, that's a very practical benefit from what I would call having an understanding of at least some degree of understanding. I'm not claiming to know anything and everything, but I've learned enough to know how to look after my own health.
Yeah.
And that's pretty helpful.
Yeah.
Also, I would say that if I think about the experiences in my life that have been pivotal, and I don't think I'm unique in this respect, they pretty much all involve an interaction with some aspect of the natural world. Those to me would be like the life-defining and life-changing moments of my life. Have been the times, for example, as an 8-year-old boy, where I had an experience where I experienced myself as being at one with all of nature, spontaneously. Something that just happened momentarily. And all my fear and even sense of being a separate self disappeared momentarily. Wow. And then as a 30-something-year-old, having an encounter with a huge stag on a walk in the Lake District when I was in a pretty low place and in a lot of distressing thinking. And I just decided to take a walk up the mountainside to clear my head. And as I turned the corner, there was a huge stag right there, right in front, looking down on me. I mean, it was massive. I'd never been that close to a stag before. And I didn't feel threatened. And it just kind of looked me in the eye for what seemed like eternity. And then when it was done with me, it just sauntered off. It just wandered away. And I came back down changed from that experience. It touched something in me. It reminded me of something. And similarly, when I traveled in India in my 30s, I can remember being at the banks of the Ganges, the great holy river in Rishikesh and in Varanasi, feeling the power of that great river and the centuries and centuries of, eons and eons of time that river has flowed from the Himalayas all through India. Again, put me in touch with something very, very deep. Being in the Egyptian desert, seeing the night sky with no light pollution. Completely different experience of seeing the London sky, which is one I normally see. These to me are, they've been pivotal moments in my life. Even here, look, I live in Hampstead now, and I look out the window every now and again, I catch sight of a kingfisher flying past. It changes my day.
I have the same experience here in Norfolk, surrounded by nature.
Yeah, it's just a moment, right? Just a moment. It pulls you out of whatever you were in your own head and all that stuff you thought was important and busyness. And suddenly a flash of blue as a kingfisher flies past my window, and I haven't seen one for about 4 months. And there it is. And I'm not going to see it again now for months, probably. You can't make that happen. But it's interesting to me that when people describe, that sense of awe, we have the word awe, awe-inspiring. When people describe what for them has been an awe-inspiring experience, it's almost always an encounter with something in nature. And that, to me, again, that speaks to the fact that I think what's happening is we're just dropping out of our kind of TikTok busy mind, and we're dropping into that deeper connection that we have with all of creation, and we're momentarily experiencing it. And then the mind kicks in again and we get busy again. But these are the moments that we live for. And to me, these are the moments that are sustaining throughout a human life. John O'Donoghue, one of the great writers and poets from Ireland who died some years ago. There was an unfinished poem that he left behind. There's only one line of it. I'll try and remember it. He said, "I would love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding."
Yeah, what a brilliant line.
Me too, John.
Yeah.
I'd love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. Isn't that beautiful? And you see, only poetry can get anywhere close to that sense of nature, of capturing that which we can experience in nature. Normal prose doesn't do it. Words don't do it. Poetry can get closer.
And you know, like a felt sense that you are there at an extraordinary moment. I felt that when my son was born.
Yes, me too. Yeah, being at the birth of my children, same thing. You're experiencing something viscerally that is, it's a phenomena of nature taking place, and you get to participate in it. Yeah, it's powerful, isn't it?
It's one of those moments. It's very, very powerful for me personally. That and seeing my this can sound a bit grim, but it's not meant to. My brother's dead body. I went to identify his body. That his spirit was not there.
Yes.
In the body, and then giving life to my son, where I felt this extraordinary life force just fly out of me. And those two moments are moments that I hold very dearly as awe-inspiring moments, because that to me is also nature.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think to me that's one of the great lessons of nature, also of natural wisdom, is it's the juxtaposition of the fact that everything that comes into form is temporary, including this. It's got a finite span of life, and yet there is something which is not. And that we get to embody both of those aspects too. As spiritual beings in human form, we have a temporary life experience. Who knows how long it will last? None of us know. And yet there's also the eternal principle is alive within us too. And that right there to me is the great mystery of the whole show.
Oh gosh, there's so many places I could go with that. I'm just going to look at the time. Can I just ask you one question about
anything?
You mentioned the sort of female and male energies of the earth. I would love for you to talk to that a bit more for someone who doesn't understand what that means, that concept. Could you, and the brilliant, you know, the sort of intelligence behind that as well.
Well, I think it's not an accident that when we talk about nature, often the prefix is Mother Nature.
Yeah.
And same for the earth, Mother Earth. And that's pretty much true universally, no matter where you go.
Yeah.
So something in us recognizes that there is a principle, a feminine principle, and a masculine principle, and that they're different. And that's not to say one is any better or any worse. It's just that they're different. And the way that we get to experience everything in life is through difference, is through contrast, through polarity. And the most fundamental polarity that exists is masculine and feminine. So that's like the origin, if you like, of everything else that we compare and contrast, up and down, wet and dry, hot and cold. You know, that the most basic form of that, I mean, in ancient Chinese, they call it the yin, the yang, and we use in our medieval tradition, there was the salt and the lunar, sun and moon, the sun representing the masculine, the moon representing the feminine principle. So really, it's just acknowledging the fact that there are these two fundamental energies at play. And it's the interplay of those two that gives us the experience of life as a totality. And the feminine, as referenced by its relationship with the earth and the moon, as I said already, it has to do with the earthly embodied. And it also has to do with the receptive mode. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes when we talk about the feminine principle, it can only be known in an intuitive way through the felt sense, which is the diametric opposite of the rational, intellectual, more left brain, which would be the more masculine principle at work. Now, it's not to say that one's good and one's bad. It's that they were designed to work together, it seems to me. but the feminine element is the one that's been largely neglected, certainly in the Western psyche for a long, long time. And I think that's what we're suffering from largely. We've been listening to intellect and neglecting the intuitive feminine wisdom for so long that it doesn't even feel familiar to many of us anymore. And we have to, we have to take some time reawakening that faculty. Not that it's ever gone away, we can't lose it, but it's like something that's been neglected for so long. We have to bring it back to life. And how do we do that? Well, first of all, we just acknowledge its existence, that we have it, that it's available to us. And then we have to approach it in that respectful way. We can't put demands on it, and we can't force it to give us answers. It doesn't work like that. Which is, so it's a kind of unlearning of an old mode. We can't figure it out using intellect, but it's more of we open ourselves, and what happens then is that the intelligence that seems to be at work behind life becomes available to us in a way that's helpful to us. So we get what we need in that sense. We get shown literally what we need. Like the example I gave you with the person with the migraine, person starts to be able to put together from within themselves. They start to see, oh, that's what this is about. So it's an interior knowledge that it doesn't come from books or from other people or from science or from anywhere else. It arises from within oneself. That to me would be the defining characteristic of it.
Perfect. So as this is sort of Mental Health Week, nature is the theme, which I just think is brilliant. What would you say is hopeful about that to someone who may be listening and finding life a bit tough?
Yeah, that's a nice question. Nature, even the word is interesting. And I think it was Zach Bush in one of his talks recently, whose work I recommend, by the way, for anyone who hasn't come across him, Dr. Zach Bush. He made reference recently in one of his talks to the fact that he looked in the dictionary, the word nature, and I looked it up when he said it, and it says, the phenomena of the physical world collectively, including plants, animals, the landscape, and other features and products of the earth, as opposed to humans or human creations. And he was flagging up the fact that, isn't that interesting? Nature doesn't include humans, apparently.
In their definition. According
to us, right? We made up that definition. Yeah. That just says everything, doesn't it? About
it does.
How we relate to it. But there's another sub-definition of the word nature, which when we talk about nature, we also refer to the intrinsic qualities or inherent features of something. We talk about it's the nature of a rock is to be hard, for example, or the nature of water is to be wet and to flow. So that's also interesting, because what that speaks to me of is the fact that our nature, when we talk about, your nature or human nature or one's own individual nature, we're talking about the same thing in essence as when we talk about something in nature. No different. We might not realize it, but we're actually referencing the same thing. And so to me, what's hopeful about that is that as we come back to our own inner, deeper nature, we discover that mental health is our birthright. And we discover that it's still available to us. That we still, like all of nature, we have the capacity to heal, to self-heal. It's built into us to heal. And what does that mean? To come back to wholeness, to recover what seem to be the lost parts of ourselves. Whatever seems to have gone missing or felt to be lacking, we discover that no, it's still available. What, for example? Well, like we could rediscover confidence that maybe we've lost for a long time, or the motivation to go out there and do something in the world. Anything like that that seems to have gotten lost, it can be reclaimed at any point in our life. Age is no barrier to this. And all it really requires is that willingness to listen in to our own deeper nature. And I find it helpful if I don't know how to do that because I'm getting too busy up here, I go to nature to remind me of what I need to remember about my own nature. And I don't think that's just me. I think a lot of people find that that's true for them to varying degrees. Most people, if you say, when do you feel most relaxed, most at ease, where do you go just to settle down? Most people will say some form of nature. Not everyone, but I would say probably a majority. People say, I just need to take my dog out in the woods or go to the beach well, listen in, because, where do you feel in your element is a useful question. Where do you feel most at ease? Where do you get nourished in the natural world? And, it doesn't have to be going across the world, something like that. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It can be literally what's on your doorstep. It could be literally plants in your apartment, just taking care of some other living thing and developing a relationship with that will help to put you back in relationship to yourself. That's what I found.
Yeah, me too. Oh my God, Ian, this has been great. I was just thinking as you were saying, I used to kill plants all the time.
Right.
And I've actually realized that I'm growing plants and I didn't make the connection. And it's because I'm taking care of them and I'm out of my head so much more.
Yeah. Now you can listen into what they actually need rather than what you think they
I wasn't listening to even myself, let alone plants.
Right, but that's it. That's a beautiful example, because if we can learn to do that for plants, guess what? We can learn to do that for ourselves too.
Yeah.
Same business.
Well, this has been brilliant. Thank you. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time for my podcast, and I'd love for you to just let everyone know what you're doing now, what you're up to, and where they can find you.
Sure, and thank you for doing this. It's a lovely thing that you've put on this week. So the Natural Wisdom Program will come back to life at some point, but in the meantime, I'm running other things with at the moment with my colleague Rachel, who's a flower essence practitioner by her background. We run a holistic healer training together, and we've got some other trainings and things coming up as well. And I also have homeopathy in my background, so occasionally I put out things for my homeopathic friends and people who want to learn that. So if people are interested, they can come to my website, theinsightspace.com, and find what I'm up to.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very, very much, Ian. I'm very, very grateful. I really appreciate it. It's been fabulous. Your knowledge is exceptional, and I love the way you share it. So thank you very much, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Charlie.